webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good morning everybody. This is Jack Porteous from the China Britain Business Council. We're still seeing a few people coming online at the moment, so we're going to hang on just for a couple of minutes to allow a few more people to sign in, and then we'll get going. So if you're wanting to go and make a cup of tea or nip out and have a quick chat with a colleague or something, then you've got just enough time to do it, and we'll be starting in 2 or 3 minutes. So please stay on the line, and looking forward to speaking to you a bit more soon. Right, good morning everybody. I think we're going to get going. It's good to have you on the line nice and early on this Wednesday morning. My name's Jack Porteous. I am the head of retail and e-commerce here at the China Britain Business Council. And one of the things that the retail and e-commerce consumer team are doing this year here at CBBC is this great webinar series that we are launching today, China's Digital Consumer 2020, and we are really fortunate to have Domenica Di Lieto, who is the CEO of Emerging Communications, telling us about how businesses can capitalise on the new post-study work visa. For those of you who aren't super familiar with CBBC, we are the UK's leading UK-China trade body. We are a membership organisation with over 700 members. We have 40 staff here in the UK, and then a further 80 in China, spread across 13 offices in 13 different geographic locations, including major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou and Shenzhen, and also a further 9 tier 2 cities. If you're wanting more information about CBBC, we'll be sharing our details with you at the end, as well as details of further upcoming webinars in the series and other upcoming events from Emerging Communications. So just a couple of housekeeping points, if I can get the thing to change, there we go. A couple of housekeeping points. Your panel for the webinar, your little control panel, should look a little bit like this. We are encouraging you to submit questions, should you have them, throughout, please, and we'll probably deal with them all at the end, but do type them in as soon as you think of them, as soon as they come up, because the more interactive that we can make this and the more that Domenica can answer your questions, I think the better the experience will be for everybody. So that's great. So just so that I can check that everybody can hear me, would you mind pushing the raise your hand button as demonstrated on the screen now, just so I can check that I'm not speaking to myself. As you can see, it should be here. Thank you. I can see a couple of people raising their hand. Fabulous. Thank you very much. And you can put your hand back down now. Right, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Domenica, who is going to be telling us exactly about what businesses should be doing to maximise the impact of this new post-study work visa.
Good morning, everybody, on this very wet morning, January. Happy New Year. I've got a couple of clients on the webinar, so Happy New Year, especially to everybody that we know and for those that we don't. Okay, I'm going to get cracking. I'm going to spend a good 20-25 minutes at the end of this on a Q&A session, so please do submit your questions. If I can't answer them immediately, I do promise to get back to everybody. I will be giving you the contact details of how to get hold of me and forthcoming events that we're running this quarter as well at the end of this series. Okay. So what does changes in legislation mean for UK businesses? Let me just get rid of that so that I can see what I'm doing. Okay. Apologies, I'm not on my computer, I'm sat next to Jack here. Okay, lovely, thank you. What does changes in legislation mean for UK businesses? Now, this could extend to any sector that you might be in. You might be in the university sector, the retail sector, travel and tourism, B2B, it doesn't really matter. What is going to happen in 2020 that's going to impact on your business? The first and most important thing is there is going to be a record-breaking number of Chinese students entering the UK for both undergraduate and postgraduate education. Now, from the standpoint of universities, this poses two things, really. One is massive opportunity, but two, conversely, will be a threat. There will be increased numbers of students applying to universities here in the UK. That means that it's going to become more and more important for universities to differentiate themselves amongst their competitors, because students have got an awful lot more choice and they're getting a lot more fussy, and we're going to talk about that a lot in this webinar. What is very important to note, and this is particularly for travel and tourism, retail, B2B, anybody who is targeting the inbound tourism sector, an average Chinese student will welcome visitors at least 3 times a year. They could be friends and family, cousins, and what they will become and do become is brand ambassadors for your product. So engaging with Chinese students in the UK is absolutely paramount to success. In fact, the brands that we speak to and we work with that are engaging with Chinese students on the ground here in the UK with a regular dialogue, with events, with WeChat groups, and actually creating a relationship with those groups of individuals are doing really, really well, because that student is going to say to mum and dad or auntie or cousins or friends coming over, I love this brand, you need to go here. Oh, this is what I do when I'm in the UK. This is where I visit. This is what I do. And all too often, brands are so focused and spending so much money, time, effort on, for example, OTAs in China, such as C-Trip, they actually forget about the low-hanging fruit here in the UK that they could be engaging with. And secondly, and much more importantly, legislation means exactly this. Up until this year, it was a directive, I believe, around about 7-8 years ago from Theresa May that if you studied in the UK, after a few short months, you have to return to China unless a company sponsored you. Now, we at Emerging Communications sponsor 32 Chinese staff here in London, but we have a sponsorship license in order to do that, and I have an immigration lawyer on tap. That is not something most businesses can afford to do, especially if you're only employing one person or possibly two. This will now mean that when a Chinese student graduates from a UK university, they have a leave to remain in order to work and get work experience in the UK. Now, this benefits us a couple of ways. One, that brings more money into your business, but two, it might mean that you can actually access a Chinese speaker either within your retail environment, within your travel or hospitality environment, within your workplace, to do things such as translation or localization. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. It's becoming a lot easier to actually have somebody within your workforce who can actually speak the language and can be the conduit with a China team if you have one or a distributor. This is a really, really important and a big change actually, and something that we have fought hard to get and we didn't think we would get. So it's one positive that came out of Q4 last year. So why record-breaking numbers of Chinese students? Now, anybody in the university sector will recognise that it's becoming increasingly difficult to travel and study in the US of A. Trump's made it very difficult to get a student visa. That's been a great opportunity for us here in the UK. The slumping pound due to Brexit or pre-Brexit negotiations for the last 4 years has meant it's a lot more inexpensive to study here than it used to be. And you're seeing an increasing number of parents trying to pay for fees up front. We're also in a situation, I would say, out of most of the sectors here in the UK, universities are quite mature at targeting Chinese students and getting very good at it. That has also meant that we are seeing increased numbers of Chinese students, but we are seeing a regular trend of increasing numbers with a prediction of 21% increase in the next 5 years. And this is a great opportunity for businesses, for universities and for brands to capitalise on this market. When we talk to brands, there is still a focus on the product. And what a lot of brands forget about or don't give enough impetus on is the experience, the culture and the story of the brand. It is the experience that your customers are going to get when they are in a regular dialogue with you as a brand, when they are shopping with you as a brand, when they're experiencing you. It's that they're going to share. And this is where you need to focus your efforts. It's no longer enough just to say that you are on Chinese social media, that you're on OTA in China, that you're actually doing cross-border with China. Whatever your business is, it is now all about the experience that you're giving to your customers. That is what they're after. And in fact, if you have a look at the motivations from 2016 to 2018, that's just 2 short years, the change in experiences has gone up by 20%, and shopping has massively dropped. So if, for example, you're a retailer and you are putting all of your emphasis on Chinese customers around shopping and transactions and not about the experience in store, you are going to miss out. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some brands we've worked with recently, and I will leave their names out of this for obvious reasons. One is a very premium kitchenware brand in Germany with over 23 outlets. They approached us and said, Domenica, we have a lot of Chinese customers in store. We have Chinese speaking staff, and quite frankly, we don't understand why they come in store and they don't buy. We're comparatively the same cost as our competitors. And so to give you an idea, they're sort of ranked in the sort of Le Creuset market. We specialise in knives, which we know Chinese consumers want. And we just can't understand why our footfall does not transcend into sales. Now, to summarise, we were tasked to do a 10-day market research project, which involved interviewing their staff, interviewing their customers, and more importantly, secret shopping and interviewing customers who chose not to spend money in store. And there were a list of things that needed to be improved. But the most important one of all that actually created the biggest impact was they didn't offer gift wrapping. Now, nobody had actually thought to ask their customers why they were buying or wanted to buy in store. And because they specialise in knives, anybody who understands Chinese culture understands that that is a lucky thing to give somebody as a gift, especially around Chinese New Year. If you don't gift wrap a product or a brand, you're missing out on part of the experience of that gift transaction between a family member or a friend. And so all that was happening was their competitors were offering an experience. They were offering a free gift wrapping service, personalization services, even shipping services, so that the customer didn't have to use the weight of said product, which could be very, very heavy, within their weight allowance. So they were wrapping around an experience into the transaction, and that meant they were winning, and the brand we were tasked to try and find out what was going on were losing. This is only one of scores of examples we come across. So all I would say is number one takeaway from today is it doesn't matter if you are a university, if you're a hotel, if you're a destination, if you're a retailer, if you're a brand. Have you asked your Chinese customers why they shop with you? Have you asked them why they don't? Have you actually tasked somebody to do some secret shopping to find out where the gaps are? Because often these gaps are tiny, yet they make all the difference. If you can get under the skin of who your customers are and their wants and needs and their triggers, it will be life-changing. And it's not an easy world out there at the moment, especially within retail, especially with travel and tourism. You've got to go one step ahead of your competition. So be very sure what that looks like and be very sure what your customers expect from your brand and deliver on it. Instagrammable moments, whether that be that your customers are sharing that on Weibo or your official WeChat channel or as video, it doesn't really matter. You want to encourage your customers to share the experience that they're having with you so that they become your brand advocate. And we'll talk about KOCs a little bit later on. You want to create authentic experiences. It is no longer about transactions. Especially amongst Gen Z, which we're going to talk about that particular segment in a second. Shopping is just part of the process. It is all around experiential shopping. And I urge you, if you haven't been to China or you haven't been in, say, the last 24, 48 months, go, be a consumer, see what it's like when you go into a store, because it's never about transactions. I will just as easily go into a store in Shanghai for the experience and actually shop online, and I'm there really to be immersed with the brand. I'm not there to actually have a transaction, and that's what your customers are expecting when they come here to the UK. In terms of capitalizing on a workforce, often brands say to me, well, why would I want a Chinese speaker, Domenica? You know, we're only targeting, for example, inbound tourists or inbound students, and we expect them to speak English. Or we've already got that covered with our distributor and market. The one thing that an agency is going to really struggle to do for a brand is customer service. There is nothing more frustrating for a Chinese customer, and we've got a very, very, very large multi-brand retailer that we deal with, where we've actually created a platform and a framework within WeChat and trained a Chinese team, and they now take the customer service inquiries. Why? Why don't we offer this to them? Because by the time they come back to, we get back to the brand and we say, what's the answer to this? And then the brand answers it and we go back to the client. You might have cost you 24 hours, especially with time differences if they happen to be based in China. It's really important that you take control of your customer service, and you do that in Mandarin. You do it on channels such as WeChat. And employing, say, a Chinese student part-time or a couple of Chinese students or a graduate is a great way of doing that. Same with social media community management. I'm not talking about necessarily your outreach on social media, which should be done by a marketing agency ideally. I'm talking about inquiries. It might be a student saying, I'm looking at your university to do a postgraduate qualification such as an MBA. I need to know, I have a pet, I have a dog. Do you have provision for that? You would be amazed at some of the inquiries we've had to deal with. That is far better managed ideally by the university itself. Same with accommodation providers and property providers and hoteliers and industry, because you can answer the question in real time and you can answer the question understanding what the answers are going to be without going through a third party. The same goes with operations. Do you have anybody in the UK that speaks Chinese that can talk to your distributor or your agent in Chinese to get under the skin of what's going on in market? All too often we're having to uncover a world of pain when we find that a distributor for, say, an e-commerce brand is controlling the marketing in China, and that has absolutely no recognition with their UK or their global brand. But if you're in the UK, you don't speak Chinese, how are you going to know that? You are so reliant on the reports they're sending over. Same goes for localization of assets. I'm not suggesting copywriting. I'm suggesting just having somebody that can even basically translate your contracts so that you can understand what they are. Somebody that can be there on the ground here in the UK that can be a Chinese speaker within your organization. Or even a conduit between your strategic Chinese agency here or in China. When we have a Chinese speaker working for a brand, it does make our life easier. It means that we get decisions made a lot quicker, especially on tactical customer service type issues. So do capitalise on this workforce as of September 2020. It is going to make a big difference to your business. It's those little things that make a difference. Last year was probably, and there's a very good article I'll be sharing today that the BBC published a couple of weeks ago about the top trends on Chinese social media for 2019. One of the biggest trends last year was sheer number of crises that happened from brands talking about Hong Kong as a separate country, or brands just not really understanding what they should and shouldn't say. Now, having somebody in the UK who is a Chinese national, as well as an expert in China, as well as your expert agency, is absolutely paramount to make sure that you don't say things that you shouldn't. And so it really is an important thing to consider as part of your operational and HR strategy. Okay, so moving on to Generation Z or Z, which is kind of my kids' generation. Very, 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 very different motivations and triggers to generations of my age group. And more importantly, every 5 years, you're seeing different types of behavior within China. The kids growing up have very different expectations as to how they're going to shop, how they're going to be, and what they expect from brands. And this poses an unbelievable amount of challenges for brands, because Gen Z are very individualistic and want control. I only have to look at my nieces and my godchildren in their 20s, even as Brits. It's all about, I want to share my experience, but I want the brand to talk to me on an individual level. It's almost like we've gone back 25 years to one-to-one marketing from email. Are you, and can you honestly say that you know your customers? And so many brands come to us, and I will say, as part of our qualification process, so who are you targeting? And I cannot tell you how many brands will say, I'm targeting Chinese people. What? That's just a few billion then. So even within the segment of 15 to 25-year-old age group, even if you were to say women between 15 and 25, you can segment that group down into finite niches. Do you know who they are? Do you know how they behave? Do you know how they consume your brands? Do you know what powers them? Do you know what they expect of you? Because one thing you can be sure of, they're global travelers, they have very high expectations, and if they are mistreated or unhappy, You don't treat them right, and that could be, at the end of the day, one of your sales staff, one of your customer, service staff, and I've had this before, saying something inappropriate, and you can be guaranteed that'll be on social media within a minute. And then that becomes a massive, massive, massive PR crisis. Wouldn't it be better just to understand them in the first place? And how many brands on this call can honestly say that they can identify the top 5% of their Chinese customers? Because I can tell you most can't. And are you talking to them? Do you have a closed group to talk specifically to your best brand advocates? Because they are very, very, very important customers to you. Do you run events? Do you talk to them individually? Do you send them gifts at Chinese New Year? Now, if these brand advocates are spending a lot of money with you, it is worth looking after them. And in the UK, we've been doing this for years. We've been doing this through email, through direct mail, but I just don't see brands doing this with Chinese customers. There seems to be this sense of almost entitlement. We're British, we've got a great brand, we've got loads of customers, and there's lots of Chinese people. Why on earth do I need to segment them? Our effort, Domenica. If there's lots of people, you do a bit of marketing, some people will buy from us. Those days have gone. Your customers are fussy. They want to be spoken to on an individual level, given what they want from your brand, and they expect you to ask them, and you need to ask them. And they are going to contribute 40% of the buying power by, the end of this year, especially in what I would call non-essential income, travel and hospitality, including dining, restaurants, theatres, retail, experiential, travel, all of these categories, food and drink, fine wine, investment, you name it, property. And it's also worth bearing in mind, I don't think there's a single category that we deal with, whether that be hair and beauty, property, travel, hospitality, it doesn't really matter, where there is not now competitors within those categories doing a really, really good job. So it's really up to the brand itself to elevate themselves above their competitors by being relevant and resonating, and not just doing things the way we did things 5 years ago. We must understand them. So buying for social currency, image is really, really, really important to Gen Z. Really important. And I would say this isn't just for Chinese consumers, this is across the board in this age category. It's about being seen to be the trendsetter. They certainly don't want to be a brand advocate of a brand that their mum might like. I can tell you that for nothing. It will all be about, I'm a trendsetter. I love this brand. I'm going to talk about this brand. I'm going to share this brand. So how powerful are these individuals if you can truly engage with them? Very, very powerful. Also, if you invest in their interests and you understand what their triggers and interests are, and you can start to get them to share these interests, that makes your marketing so much more powerful. And it's all about craving happiness and satisfaction in the moment. So many of my age group are doing meditation to try and live in the moment. I find it quite hilarious, whereas we've now got this segment of individuals who are all about living in the moment, all about experiences, all about living in the moment. Very, very different to the way that we behave. And you need to truly understand that category, talk to them, conduct research, interview them, have a dialogue with them. We have a number of brands where we have identified, and these are the brands that will allow us to do so, their top 5% of spending customers. We have separate dialogues, we have separate events, we have separate communication. We've segmented WeChat groups, large WeChat groups, into individual buying behaviours. When you get to the position of being able to do this, it is no different to the way that you would segment your email database if you're a large retailer, by way of example, or a hotel chain. You're just using different platforms, and you just need to think about things in a slightly different way, but it's essentially the same segmentation exercise. And this generation of 20s are influencers, disruptors, and consumers. So ignore them at your peril. They're vloggers. They are what we call KOCs. They are creating content on your behalf about your brand. Oh, we have a fire alarm test.
we'll just put everybody on mute for 1 second. Please do hold on. And we're back. Sorry about that.
That's hilarious. My sincere apologies about that. Couldn't make it up. So these influencers are creating content on your behalf. Are you actually controlling that content? Do you even know what it is? It's very, very important to do social listening. It's very, very important to constantly be aware of what your competitors are doing and what customers are talking or saying about your brand. Because not everything you can control, but if you know about it, you can reuse that content. And we do it all the time. We do it for universities, we do it for retailers, we do it for hotels, we do it for property. Because if somebody is being your brand ambassador and has positive sentiment around your brand, wouldn't it be better to share that on your platform? But if you don't actually look for this sort of information or this sort of content, you can't do that. So KOCs, and I write about this regularly, and we're actually running an event, which I'll talk about a little bit later on in February about this, are the most misused and
Hello, everybody. We are having some technical issues. Apologies. We're back up, and we were on this slide.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Right, we're back in the room.
So KOC, really, really important to understand that as a brand, when you talk about your brand, you talk about your brand from your brand, it's never going to have the credibility that a customer talking about the experience they had with you as being a positive experience, and they're sharing effectively for free your brand because they love your brand so much. This is what so many brands just fail to understand and do not have a dialogue with these customers. So go away today, find out who these KOCs are, do some social listening, find out who your biggest customers are and engage with them. We've worked with brands where we've had afternoon tea, where we've run parties, where we've run events, whatever happens to be relevant to your brand. And if you're not sure, contact me later today, email me, WeChat me, I'll give you all my details at the end. Find out who they are and engage with them. They are your biggest brand advocate and the lowest hanging fruit you will ever engage with. They'll be on mobile, they'll be sharing video, they'll be sharing experiences with their followers, with their friends. They are saying how amazing your brand is. And if you don't have any KOCs, why not? What do you need to change within your environment to create them? What do you need to do to truly engage with your Chinese segments? And do you even know what that is? And if not, you need to find that out. So challenges, we've talked about opportunities. So we know we've got an increased number of Chinese inbound students, tourists, domiciled Chinese here on tier 1 visas, investing in property, living here, sending their kids here to public school. But this also causes an increased number of global competition. So we know that they are fussy. We know that they no longer just expect you to be on Chinese platforms, that you've got to be truly engaging with them on a one-on-one basis. And your competition within the UK and within China with Chinese segments is actually global. It is not UK brands. This is something that is very, very different and something you really must understand. So when I'm in China and I'm bombarded with messages every single day, out of home, in store, in my hotel, in the taxi, on WeChat, it is a very noisy environment. Those brands are from Australia, from America, from France, from Italy, from Spain, and actually the UK is very, very slow to the party. Be aware of who your global competitors are, not just your British competitors in your segments. Be aware of what your customer segments expect from your service. And I'm talking off and online. See that as one ecosystem. Do not separate them. Do not have your retail teams and your digital teams working separately with Chinese consumer activations. It will not work. And if you're not sure what the expectations of your customers are, ask your customers. Find out what your competitors are doing and see if they're doing it better, and be really objective with yourselves. Involve the board, involve everybody on the board, and make this a directive for 2020. And then work out what your dialogue is going to be with your individual tribes for your brand. Either those domiciled here, which is what we're talking about mainly today, so students, it could be those living and working here, it could be tourists. Break them down into individual segments. We've got a number of retailers that we have upwards of 12, 14, 16 individual tribes that we target, purely UK-based Chinese. So it's not one mass homogenous group of Chinese shoppers. They will all behave very differently. And be really selective. If 80% of your revenue is coming from two segments, target two segments and do it properly. Don't try and target everybody with one mass approach. They have a low attention span. They're bombarded with messages. We all are, let's face it. Social media is highly distracting when you're trying to work, when you're trying to shop. So make sure what you're saying is highly relevant and you'll get some cut through. And more importantly, offer them an experience that they'll want to share. Certainly do not offer them an experience that they'll want to share negatively, because trying to come back from that will take you years. And every bit of work you've done in marketing your brand will be wasted. So please, I urge you, really do take care with your customer service. Do take care with everybody who is dealing with the customer transaction all the way through the customer funnel, because that's probably the most important thing that we can say today. So key takeaways. I thought it would make sense to just give you my top 10, and there are loads, but these for me are the most important things to think about. It doesn't matter about your industry. Number one, and you should start with this, segment your customers and your stakeholders. Identify what they want, how they want it, and why you can deliver it better than your competitors. And be really honest with yourself, and don't compete in areas that you can't compete. If logistically you can't be quicker than somebody, don't try and compete in that area. Be very clear what your differentiators are. And do not forget your stakeholders. And by that I mean, as well as your customer segments, you also need to be aware of your staff, distributors, agents, anybody on the ground in China. Everybody's got to be aligned. You've got to be marketing to them as well as to your customers. Number two, be one step ahead of your competitors. Constantly innovate. Whatever you might have in Q1 of your plan for 2020 and for your plan for 2020 and 21, you can be assured that legislation in China or behavior within your customer segments will change. And this means that you constantly have to adapt your plan. We're doing it all the time. We might have a plan for a client, but we will find that what used to work didn't, and we need to change. You need to do the same. Constantly innovate, constantly change. And if you're constantly talking to your customers, this is actually not that difficult. Give them what they want. It's really not that difficult. But if you don't know what that is, you are working completely blind. Once you know what your customers want, you can create compelling stories. You can be relevant, engaging, you can resonate, rather than just broadcast nonsensical content that you have translated from Facebook or Instagram. Or even worse than that, Google Translate your British content into Chinese, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So create stories. If you don't have much resource, do less of it, but do it well. And make sure that the content you're creating on all the platforms where your customers are hanging out makes sense. so that they then share it. Create shareable moments. We're working with the tourist board at the moment where we've created effectively an Instagram board, which they had to actually take down the last couple of days because the weather's been so bad, but they've had incredible traction with that. Chinese visitors, tourists, students, those that live in the local vicinity are using that to share moments from their days out within Portsmouth and what's, on a beautiful day, and look at it and absolutely, I don't know what that cost. I think it was about £200. That's created a shareable moment on all of their platforms, as well as on Instagram, Weibo, WeChat. So think about how you can encourage your customers to share moments within your brand, in store, however you are engaging with them. Be sure of a way that you can capture their imagination. And don't just focus all of your effort on Chinese New Year. You've got an entire year. You've got graduation in June, and you've got wedding season in June. There is lots and lots of times of the year you can capitalize on, and we talk about that more in our next event. Identify your top 5% of your customers. Make them or create KOCs out of that segment and look after them. If 5% of your customers are spending the most money within these segments of Chinese consumers, is it not worth looking after them? Sending them a gift, running an event, having a party? Do you even know who they are? I can guarantee most people on this call don't. And a lot of you might say, well, we don't have any. Do you know that? Do you actually know who your customers are? And just word for the wise, looking at your e-commerce website, if you're in an e-commerce field, and looking at transaction history and looking at something that sounds like a Chinese name is not the way to do it. They could be Japanese, Korean, Hong Kongese, Singaporean. So I suggest you find out where your gifts and your purchases are actually being sent to. And if it's mainland China, they're Chinese. And if it's not, they're not. Find out who they are. Employ Chinese speakers, even if it's one to start with, in customer service and community management. We work with so many brands in so many categories, and this is something we really advocate. So many agencies will suggest that they take this on. It will never be as good as you could do yourselves within the brand, because you know your brand. You can answer the questions in real time. And as I've mentioned, we're talking about generations of, we're talking about Chinese consumers that don't wait. I don't wait. When I'm in China, I expect my lunch to be delivered within 30 minutes, and it is. I order something, I expect it to be within my office by 2 hours. You wouldn't get that here. So be aware that there is no patience. So if one of your customers doesn't get an answer quickly enough, the chances are they are not going to be very happy, and they may well publish that. Far better to have somebody in-house, ideally in China and in the UK, who speaks the language, who can answer those immediate inquiries. Leave the strategy to the agency and you take on the tactics. Use a specialist agency to develop your China strategy, and tactically you can deliver some of that in-house, but just make sure you have a roadmap and you're constantly innovating that roadmap, as we discussed. And regularly review what your customers want, and don't make assumptions. If possible, use a third party to do your secret shopping. There's nothing worse than using one of your Chinese speaking staff to do secret shopping. They know your brand too well. You need somebody that doesn't know your brand at all, ideally, that goes in with certain expectations and will fill in the gaps for you, so it's much more objective. And keep up to date with the Chinese market. The CBBC, who I'm sat with here now, Emerging Comms, there's lots and lots and lots of information out there, LinkedIn especially, which will give you what you need to know about the Chinese market. Attend events. I'm currently writing a book which will have an awful lot of information in it. There's an awful lot of information out there. Make sure somebody within your organisation is tasked with finding that information and sharing it. It will give you opportunities, and you'll be aware of upcoming icebergs. And lastly, ensure the experience that you offer is an experience that your customers will want to share, and it's an often online integrated experience. Do not separate out those two, often online experiences because your consumer does not see it like that. It's not how it's done in China. The word omnichannel is so old hat in China. It's just an expected thing that you buy when and how you want, and that really the offline retail is more about the experience than about a transaction. So be aware, and we've shared a lot of videos. They're all on my LinkedIn profile. I think we're about to share video number 4 of the true omnichannel experience and what consumers want in China. Take a look at that. That will give you some insights into what to expect. So, sorry, wrong way. I'm running an event in February. If you scan that QR code now, that will take you through to a landing page, or you'll find details on my LinkedIn profile and on our website under emergingcoms.com events. Just a short half day. We're talking about basically aligning what you're doing within China locally here so that you've got a consistent brand, but everything is localized, how to deal with distributors and agents, how to truly engage with Gen Z in a lot more detail than we've discussed today, and what sort of channels to activate with what sorts of content. I think you'll find it highly engaging. I think we had 5 slots left yesterday, so if you want to sign up for that, you'll need to do that pretty soon. We'll be running a series of events this year, which I'll share on LinkedIn. You'll find me on LinkedIn under Domenica Di Lieto, so please connect. I'm very active. We're very active on Twitter, on Emerging Comms, and you'll also find me on WeChat, so by all means contact me on LinkedIn and you'll see my WeChat ID on there. So, moving on to the Q&A session.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Domenica. That was incredibly comprehensive, I think, as a view of how to access how to make the most of the brands that are now make most of the extra Chinese that we're now getting in the UK. We've got a slightly odd box here. We've got a question here. Should I adapt my brand experience tool for the China market or replicate the same experiences I offer in my UK store or site? That was the question. So
sorry, say that again.
So
I was trying to read it off the screen.
Should you adapt, just offer the same experience as you offer to UK customers, either on your website or in store, or should you offer a bespoke and different experience for Chinese consumers?
Oh, this is a good question, and we've had this with an airport actually. It's really important that you identify that obviously your Chinese consumers are going to want a bigger or a different experience to say your UK customers, but what you do not want to do, as I'm sure I'm not telling you to suck eggs here, is to alienate your existing customers from other countries such as UK, Germany, Spain, France, etc. So if you are in a retail situation within store, it's a good idea to do basics such as have Chinese translated materials. Obviously, you'll have Chinese sales staff. You'll make sure that you've got activations, especially around key shopping times of the year. We've got Chinese New Year coming up really early this year, 25th of January. A lot of our retailers are already activating on social media as well as in store, various promotions. And then you've obviously got Autumn Festival. And as I said, you've got the wedding season, which tends to be in June. You've got the graduation season. So it really depends on your brand as to what you should be activating. So you can activate in store Chinese promotions and Chinese activations. If you're in luxury, obviously it's going to be more GWP. It's not going to be money off. And you can also run events specifically for your top spending Chinese customers, and that can be very specific to them. So what I would say is, within the retail environment, you can do it in a very subtle fashion that your Chinese customers will understand and engage with without putting off any of your other target segments from other countries. And basic stuff like have a QR code at the till point, have it all over the store so that they follow you on your corporate WeChat so that you can engage with them after they've shopped with you. Use Chinese social media platforms to engage with them on a regular basis and identify those top customers and have a separate event or events throughout the calendar specifically for that target audience.
And you mentioned running events and talking to your consumers and creating those channels and ways to communicate with those top consumers. Is that something that emerging communications can support with?
Absolutely. I mean, we used to call ourselves a digital agency, and in fact, we're rebranding ourselves. Digital doesn't really exist. It's all about off and online. We can't work with a brand and only think about digital. So, for example, if we're working with retail, of course, once we've identified the top customers and the various segments that we're activating, we're looking at KOL activations and curation of content with KOLs, as well as how we activate the KOCs in store and online, as well as running events, what we need to do in terms of in-store material such as point of sale material and activation. So off and online activations for all of our clients, I think is pretty safe to say, whether that be the hotel sector, travel and hospitality, retail, or even universities. Really important as well and this is more for the university sector, to identify some student ambassadors. We've had some very, very, very good results by interviewing and recruiting student ambassadors for each of the faculties within universities, and they then become the KOC for the university for that academic year. So very important.
Excellent, thank you very much. Let me just check to see if we have any more questions. Question from Kevin, who's on the line, says, I have heard of KOLs. Can you explain a bit more?
Absolutely. Okay, firstly, what's a KOL? What's a KOC? KOC is an existing customer advocate of yours who talks positively about you, happy to share content, doing it because they're a brand ambassador. A KOL, or a key opinion leader, dependent on the sector, is they all have one thing in common. In China, you tend to pay for them. And we work with KOLs all the time. In fact, we have a KOL department. And a KOL is basically a trusted ambassador of a particular sector that has a lot of followers. Now, there are different types of KOLs. So you can have celebrity KOLs that might be a brand ambassador for a brand who have a lot of followers and they are aligned with that brand and they are well known, whether they're a film actress or a singer or what have you. But often brands think, oh wow, KOL's really, really expensive, wouldn't know where to start. Now, KOLs are active in every single industry. It is anybody that has a following and has credibility in a sector. So we work with KOLs within medicine for hospitals, within engineering, within B2B, within fashion, within beauty. It really depends on the brand and who you're targeting, so what customers, this is the number one thing, and then we will identify the right KOLs to be an ambassador for your brand. The days of identifying a KOL and using that KOL to spread the message around your brand, in other words, use them as a media property, have gone. It's now much more about curating content with a KOL. For example, we curated an entire video for Chats with House in Derbyshire with a historian KOL and a celebrity KOL, and that is still being used as a marketing asset and has had amazing traction. We use KOLs with Liberty London. We use KOLs with all of our brands. And it's very important that the right KOLs are chosen, which is what we do, and then we curate the right content that will engage with your customers. I hope that's answered your question, Kevin.
Great, thank you very much. I imagine it has answered the question, but I'm sure, Kevin, if you've got further questions, you can get in touch with Domenica on LinkedIn, as she's suggested. I think we've probably got time for one more quick question. So I was just going to ask, you mentioned the opportunity to employ students. So what are you mentioned some suitable tasks that you can have them do.
Yeah.
Are there things that you really shouldn't be getting students to do and you should be getting an agency or some other kind of more senior member of staff to be doing?
Absolutely. In fact, we had this the other day. So if you employ a graduate, undergraduate, postgraduate who happens to be a Chinese national to, say, look after customer service, the point one is make sure who you employ, it's not just about the fact that they are a Chinese national and speak the language, but they are a good fit for the brand and that they are actually a good fit for the task. So, for example, don't employ somebody who happens to be Chinese in a customer service department who has no patience and is actually quite rude. They need to have the same attributes that you would expect of customer service in any industry, in any language. Same goes for if you've got somebody running your communities on social media. When it comes to marketing and copywriting, it's absolutely vital to understand that if you employ a postgraduate in engineering from a university and you ask them to write copy for you, as for example, we had a luxury handbag brand a couple of days ago that employed an engineering graduate, and not surprisingly, the content was dry, unengaging and cold and transactional, and this poor employee is not a copywriter, and they're also not passionate about the sector or the brand. So that's where an agency might come in. They might put together the content framework, the customer segmentation, we do this a lot, and employ the right person in-house for the company, train them, and then they can go on their way, or you can provide a strategic framework or a mentoring program for that individual. We do that on a regular basis. So just be sure to employ the right person for the job. Don't just employ them because they're Chinese. And be very careful that you employ somebody who is a Chinese national, not Hong Kongese or Singaporean, because their level of, they're talking Cantonese versus Mandarin, fairly critical. And obviously that will extend to any written Chinese. But if you are going to have somebody write for you, make sure they're a copywriter. Don't just employ them because they happen to be a Chinese graduate. Yeah, hope that answers the question.
It really does. And I think that is where we're going to finish up today. So thank you for sticking with us through a fire alarm test and also through Adobe Acrobat crashing. You can never accuse it of being boring, tuning into a CBBC webinar, I hope. Thank you very much to Domenica. I will send out her details. If you are wanting more information or access to these slides, then you need to contact her directly, and I'll send out her details so that you are able to do that. Looking forward to seeing you all on future webinars and at CBBC events in the future. Hope you all have a great Wednesday and best of luck for the rest of the month. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.